I really wish that I wasn't the one to talk about this because I don't know anything about War Horrors. I don't know anything about Vavra. I don't know anything about Kingdom Come Deliverance. I don't care because I saw this coming a mile away, right? I didn't pre-order the game. I wasn't talking about it. I wasn't acting as if this was like, oh, some savior of Western developers. Like, it was always a smokescreen. It was always a farce, right? Every single time, the same playbook that people keep falling for over and over. We put out a game that is based in traditional and is everything you want, and then with the sequel, they add in a bunch of woke shit that nobody asked for or wanted. We saw this with The Last of Us Part 2. We saw this with the Mass Effect sequels, right? This should be a generally understood thing at this stage, is that the idea behind these based developers is to slowly introduce more and more progressive nonsense into them in an attempt to normalize it. Now, at this point, the market is so sick of this is that they are starting to push back against some aspects of wokeness, diversity where it doesn't belong, and homosexuality specifically, both of which are in Kingdom Come Deliverance too. Right. This is a very typical thing for a Western developer to do. The bait and switch. Like, this doesn't surprise me at all, right? Saw it coming a mile away. I don't know if I outright talked about it earlier. Again, it's really hard for me to keep track of everything I say and talk about, but this was very evident months ago. Okay. Everybody was coping about this. Everyone was damage controlling. They were trying to say that the leaked images were fake and that there was no confirmation, right? Anything to protect their golden goose, the based warhorse, the trusted developer. And now that we know that the game is 100% woke, that it is compromised, that it isn't worth supporting, what are the anti-woke YouTubers doing? What is Grum's doing? What is Side Scrollers doing? What is, Arch Warhammer? Like, what are these people doing as of, like, right now? They are either staying silent and not talking about it, or they're trying to do damage control. No one's actually coming out and condemning what the game is doing, condemning the creators for the bait and switch, condemning what they're trying to do here, because none of these people are actual conservatives. None of these people actually care about video games. All they want is to grift and act outraged over things that really don't matter. Most specifically, and I do think this needs to be talked about more, the idea that the SJWs are trying to take away sexy women in games. They'll talk about that until the cows come home, but when it comes to introducing homosexuality into a game that actively makes the product worse, when it adds in a black character that outright makes the game worse, like, oh, we can't talk about this, like, we can't condemn this, the behavior, like, we can't talk about the message. This is how you know that the YouTube community isn't worth a damn. Okay, this is how you know that these people aren't actually willing to talk about real issues, talk about how these kind of practices actually diminish game quality. They're not going to talk about Vavra's history. They're not going to talk about, like, the bait and switch. They're not going to talk about any of that, when they could be grifting off of people complaining about DL site instead, when they could be, like, appealing to gooners, as opposed to talking about actual video games, right? This is the core problem with Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. This was the problem with, like, everything Gamergate related. This has been a problem since 2014, is that, like, all of the really good video games that come out and get made, get completely ignored in favor of propping up absolute nonsense that nobody cares about. Whether it's Stellar Blade for having sexy designs, whether it's Black Myth Wukong for having I don't even know why Black with Wukong was supposed to be hated anymore. I think that had sexy designs too. Whether it's like, the original Kingdom Come Deliverance, like, oh, it doesn't have any diversity at all. Like, ooh, like, it's like, this is not something that we should be celebrating gaming for. Okay, like none of that really matters in the grand scheme of things. What I care about is like whether or not the game is good, and none of those three games I just mentioned were good, right? And yet every single time people act surprised when the developer comes out and like does some kind of bait and switch, whether it's censoring costumes and Stellar Blade after insisting that it would not happen, whether it's whether they're doing damage control for Kingdom Come Deliverance too. They won't talk about the things that really matter, and instead will like bluster on about things that are kind of safe to talk about. Like in a lot of ways, the topics they do talk about lean left. In this sense that like, oh, we should allow sexy women in games. Leftist position, right? Like to me, it's becoming increasingly clear that every personality on YouTube, the one that has any kind of prominence, like is completely unreliable and just a complete shill for any product that will get them any scrap of attention or relevancy or clout online. Grums is like probably the most blatant example of this, but I do think at this stage it is safe to say that like side scrollers is also culpable. People like Oh No It's Alex is also culpable. Like these people aren't addressing the reality of the situation, in that like video games are getting worse because of diversity. They are getting worse because of the inclusion of homosexuality. Until we address those two specific things, we're not going to see a lot of improvements in the Western gaming sphere. Diversity is a bad thing. And this really does need to be understood among like the general population, and it really does need to be emphasized when talking about this kind of thing. It's not just like some blanket term they throw out. This is something that they deeply believe and try to implement into every aspect of their personal lives and their products, and it has led to a complete and total collapse of the Western video game world, to the point where it's honestly not even relevant going into the next console generation. There's nothing from Western developers that I'm looking forward to on Nintendo Switch 2, right? There's nothing they could possibly do to get me excited for what they're going to do on that console, because like they haven't been cultivating talent, right? They don't have any relevant franchises. They don't have any real solid developers. They basically just have a handful of people that are hyped up for very arbitrary petty reasons. Developers like, Larian, like, oh man, it's just like a D&D campaign. Like, come on. Like, we do need to start talking about the issues with gaming YouTubers, because in a lot of ways they are no different than gaming journalists. Kingdom Come Deliverance is never an IP that should have gotten any attention or praise whatsoever from the community. This wasn't something that should have been put on a pedestal. Nobody should have like believed Avra. Nobody should have believed Avra's lies. Right? This should have been something that was a lot more transparent. And people are going to have to wake up to the fact that nothing is going to get better. Like they need to simply just pick up and leave the instant they see any red flags whatsoever. And that extends to other brands too. Warhammer 40K, everyone should just leave. Harry Potter, left that years ago. Like all these like franchises, Star Trek, all these franchises that have just been ruined over the years. Why keep supporting them? Why care? Like to me, it's very self-evident that that people need to start taking more of a stand against this kind of thing. And, harassing developers on Twitter is not the way to do it. All you have to do when this kind of thing happens is just refuse to engage with the product anymore.